Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry, and today's podcast is really just going to be me talking about what is certainly one of my favourite anthology series of all time. I would expect anyone that's a horror fan to know of this show, to have probably seen at least a few episodes, if not all episodes. For anyone that's not a horror fan, I would certainly still expect them to have heard of this. To me, this show really kind of pushed horror anthologies really into the heart of the mainstream. And that show, of course, is Tales from the Crypt. Now, this show actually first aired back in 1989. Upon release, it was actually HBO's most successful show of all time. It actually ran for 7 seasons, consisting of 93 episodes. I believe the original plan was actually 3 seasons, but it proved to be so popular that it actually went on for 7 seasons. And as I said, it was HBO's most successful show upon initial airing. Tales from the Crypt. Now, it's based on the classic EC horror comics from the 1950s, which, there was Tales from the Crypt, there was The Haunt of Fear, The Vault of Horror, Shock Suspense Stories, Crime Suspense Stories, among a few others. EC was very much one of the big comic companies back in the day. Now, these comics actually caused quite some controversy upon release. These comics were the kind of comics that a lot of parents didn't particularly like their kids reading. As I said, they were quite controversial. The monsters, the gore, and the comic code was actually introduced in the 50s, which essentially banned these books. I mean, these comics were actually blamed on juvenile delinquency. Politicians were lining up in streets. They were actually burning these books. These books were blamed on corrupting the youth, the youth out there. They're very much considered classics now, certainly among comic fans. And obviously, with the TV show in '89, Tales from the Crypt has become an incredibly famous name. There was actually a movie released in '72, which was courtesy of British film studio Amicus. Actually one of the best anthologies out there, in my opinion. It was followed in the following year by The Vault of Horror, released in '73. Amicus were a British film studio that actually churned out quite a few horror anthology films. Tales from the Crypt certainly being one of the best, if not arguably the best. The comics were... I used to read these comics as a kid. I was 7 years old when the TV show actually aired. But I've actually got a great aunt that lives in New York. And as a kid, my great aunt used to send a lot of these comics, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, Haunt of Fear especially, to my grandmother. And I used to spend a lot of time with my grandmother as a kid. I used to hold myself up in her bedroom reading these comics. And I was just hooked. And then when the TV show first aired, I think I probably started watching into the 2nd or 3rd season, but I used to sneak down late at night to watch this show. I think it's really fair to say that Tales from the Crypt was very much a show that had so many big names attached to it. This was a pretty big deal. As an executive producer, we had the likes of Robert Zemeckis, who directed the Back to the Future trilogy, Forrest Gump, Castaway, Joel Silver, Richard Donner, that, of course, directed all 4 Lethal Weapon films, 1978 Superman, The Goonies. The amount of stars, of big-name stars that actually appeared in this show is really quite staggering. Everyone from Arnold Schwarzenegger, Benicio del Toro, Brad Pitt, Demi Moore, Brad Dourif, Dan Aykroyd, Lance Henriksen, acting legend Kirk Douglas. The list just goes on. Michael J. Fox, Robert Patrick, Sandra Bullock, Whoopi Goldberg was in there, Tom just incredible. Even behind the camera, the likes of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tom Hanks, and Michael J. Fox actually directed episodes. As I said, this show really did push horror anthologies right into the mainstream, and obviously having a big platform, which of course HBO, I don't think HBO really needs any introduction. HBO is one of the biggest television networks out there. Obviously, they've just got bigger and bigger with the likes of Sopranos and, 6 Feet Under, Game of Thrones. But Tales from the Crypt was their biggest show at that point. And as I said, very successful. 7 seasons, a huge cast of, some very established actors. Some actors were kind of like, this was one of their earlier acting roles. Just so many great episodes as well. I mean, the thing is, because this was on HBO as well, there were no kind of censorship issues. Basically, they had free reign to how to make these shows, and when this was released, there was a lot of stuff you saw in the show that you typically didn't see in TV shows. There was no kind of censorship issues or anything like that. This is a show that was very much kind of pretty balls to the wall for its time. And to be honest, Tales from the Crypt, what I love about it, like with most anthologies, is the show became renowned for its big twist endings. Okay, now, anyone that knows me knows that I'm a huge fan of anthologies. The Twilight Zone is probably not only my favourite anthology of all time, it's probably my favourite TV series of all time. It's certainly a show that was ahead of its time, certainly one of the most influential shows of all time. And, much like the Twilight Zone, that and Alfred Hitchcock Presents are kind of like the granddaddy of anthology shows. Tales from the Crypt obviously came out many years later. But what I love about this show is, this show has some real great twist endings. And essentially most tales tend to be morality tales as well. Quite often a character committing a bad deed, karma, they get their comeuppance. Very often this show revolves around morality tales, and it's horror, but a lot of these episodes as well, I mean, admittedly, some episodes are a little darker than others, but at times it's a show that didn't take itself too seriously. It was a show that it had a great blend of horror with humour. The directors, I think Michael J. Fox and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it must be noted, I mean, one of the highlights for me in this show this show had a fantastic opening. The opening to the show is great, with a brilliant score by Danny Elfman, who, of course, is one of the biggest composers in all of Hollywood, and he actually composed a fantastic score for this show. The intro is just great, and let's face it, the Crypt Keeper, the character that actually introduces each story, is a real standout for this show. Brilliantly voiced by John Cassier, who absolutely nails the voice of the Crypt Keeper. The Crypt Keeper, I believe, it took 6 puppeteers to actually control him, and actually 4 people just to actually do the face alone. It was quite an achievement in puppetry. So the Crypt Keeper himself is just a fantastic creation, introducing and ending each of these stories. And as I said, brilliantly voiced by John Cassier, and the amount of puns that he comes out with and all that, he's quite the character, and he is a strong part, he is a strong component of this show. Now, there are so many great episodes from Tales from the Crypt. Now, it's actually called Tales from the Crypt, but many of the stories in this show weren't just from Tales from the Crypt. They were from Tales from the Crypt's brother titles, if you will. The Haunt of Fear, The Vault of Horror. There were a few from Shock Suspense Stories, and I believe there were actually 2 or 3 from Crime Suspense. So even though it was called Tales from the Crypt, which there were actually quite a few episodes from Tales from the Crypt, there were many episodes from The Vault of Horror and The Haunt of Fear as well, which were all part of the EC brand. Now, as I said, these comics, when they came out, they caused controversy. They're very much considered classics now, certainly among comic fans out there. Tales from the Crypt and its companion titles certainly have a big fan base. And I just really want to talk about, some of the episodes. some of my favourite episodes of this show, which have very much become ingrained in my mind over the years. Now, admittedly, by the seventh season, I think the show had gone downhill. Okay, season 6 and 7 clearly aren't as good as the earlier seasons. It must be noted for the seventh season as well. The show actually started filming in the UK. It was an American show prior to that, but for the final season, they actually decided to film in the UK. Now, with Tales from the Crypt, there's so many great stories out there. From Vault of Horror, Haunt of Fear, there's so many great stories. But this show actually managed to last 93 episodes. And there were some greats. Now, there were actually talks a while back, I believe it was a couple of years back now at least, of Tales from the Crypt actually getting revived, which had me very excited. I mean, if they could possibly capture the essence of this show, I'd be really happy. Unfortunately, nothing come to fruition. M. Night Shyamalan was actually attached to the project. It was said that he would actually be an executive producer, that he was going to be at the helm. I'd imagine he would have possibly directed maybe some episodes as well. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's happening. I mean, never say never, but it has officially been shelved for now. There's a lot of potential there because there are so many great stories within those comics that have never actually been made into the TV show. Or as I said, there was Tales from the Crypt, the 72 film of Vault of Horror, which actually had 5 stories per movie. But the idea, just the prospect, the potential of a Tales from the Crypt revival had me really excited. I'd love to see the show make a comeback. There was actually a Tales from the Crypt Keeper, which was actually an animated series, which was actually quite successful for, obviously geared towards a younger audience. I mean, obviously, there was nothing really scary about it or anything. It was more towards, as I said, the younger audience and that. But there were some good episodes. It was a good animated show. Obviously, nowhere near as successful as the live action show. But yeah, I just want to talk about some of the episodes, actually, some of my personal favourites, which is actually hard to do. Even the top 10 would be really hard to do because there's at least probably 35 episodes, at least, that I actually love, really like to love. I think one episode for me, one of my personal favourites from season 1 is called Dig That Cat, He's Real Gone, starring Joe Pantoliano, who, of course, years later, 10 years later, in fact, starred in The Matrix, and he's been in a lot of stuff. Dig That Cat Is Real Gone. About a bum, homeless guy who's basically given the opportunity of a lifetime. He has a cat's gland put inside him, giving him 9 lives. And he basically becomes a sideshow attractor. He ends up getting rich, making a lot of money by, people essentially killing him. But he, of course, has to keep check on how many lives he's got left. I'm not going to go into details in case people are listening and haven't seen it. What an ending. What a twist. And this is the first season. I believe this was the third episode of the show. Great episode. Still one of my favourites. Again, it's a show that it has a lot of comedy. There's a lot of humour in there. It has a great ending. I believe this episode, I'm not sure. I think this episode might have been directed by Robert Zemeckis or Richard Donner. Now, the next episode I'm going to talk about is An All Through the House, which was originally a story in the 72 film. Now, this episode was directed by Robert Zemeckis, who's one of the biggest name film directors out there, and it stars Larry Drake as an escaped maniac who's actually dressed up as Santa Claus. It's very much the format of a slasher movie. It's basically a half an hour slasher in this episode. A woman has actually killed her husband. It's over the Christmas period, and then she realises that there's an escaped axe murderer on the loose. This is, again, like Dig That Cat Is Real Gone. It's very much kind of a morality tale. This episode's just so much fun. It really does capture the Christmas spirit really well as well. In the original 72 film, it was actually Joan Collins that actually starred in this segment. Again, I think it's kind of one of the standout segments from the original movie. Another episode that I really like that is actually quite a contrast to most episodes in the show, and that is it's called Freeze a Crowd. Again, I don't want to go into details, okay? This episode is very bleak. There's no humour in sight. And this ending has a gut punch of an ending. This certainly, without a doubt, has one of the bleakest, if not the bleakest ending in the entire show. I love this episode for how much of a contrast it is to so many of the others. It's basically about a guy. He's clearly on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He clearly, he has problems, but he starts to become convinced that his wife is having an affair with his friend. That's all I really want to say. It's a great episode. Another episode is Death of Some Salesman. Again, a complete contrast to the one that I was just talking about. In Death of Some Salesman, it's very much a Tim Curry vehicle. Now, Tim Curry is a guy I love. Yeah, he's a fantastic character actor. Pennywise, obviously from Stephen King's It, Rocky Horror Picture Show. He was actually the Horned Demon in 1985's Legend. I absolutely love Tim Curry. And Tim Curry actually plays 3 characters in this one episode. This episode, and it stars Ed Begley Jr. actually as well in the lead role. This is an episode that actually manages to be funny, and there's actually one scene in it as well that's really cringeworthy. This actually has one scene that really does make my stomach churn. It's an episode, you can see the twist coming. I don't feel like it's a huge... But if you're a Tim Curry fan, this is a great episode, and just seeing Tim Curry play 3 very different characters from each other, it's great. Now, another episode that's, again, a complete contrast. This is very much a drama, in fact, with what's probably the most star-studded cast, actually, of any episode. It's called Yellow. And what stands out about this episode's about an hour long. This is actually, it's a longer episode. It has a real cinematic quality to it as well. It's actually set during World War II, I believe. And it actually stars acting legend Kirk Douglas. Lance Henriksen's in there. Dan Aykroyd's in there. And Eric Douglas, Kirk Douglas's own son. Obviously lesser well-known than Michael Douglas. But yeah. It's a great episode. Basically, Eric Douglas is fighting in the military. His father is the sergeant, the commander, and he shows cowardness. And I really don't want to go into it, actually, but his father is kind of ashamed of how his son is. His son does not want to be in the army. He doesn't want to be fighting this war. But I don't really want to say anything else. It has a hell of an ending. It has a great ending. As I said, it's a very cinematic quality. I think this is one of them episodes that really showed that TV shows can kind of be up there with films in terms of their scope and budget. Now, another episode that I really want to talk about is Late Arrival, which I actually think this is one of the creepier episodes. This stars a very established British actor in David Warner, and Zelda Rubinstein from Poltergeist, one of the most recognisable women out there. About a child psychologist who, he basically, it's over the radio, he helps people, try and control and, help with their naughty children, shall we say. And he decides to actually do a house call on a woman who's apparently got the worst kid on the planet. And he's going there, it's going to boost the ratings, etc. And he gets more than he bargained for. That's all I'm going to say. He shows up at this house, and there's kind of an air of mystery with this one as well. David Warner gets more than he bargained for. This is quite a creepy little episode. It doesn't really have like a big twist as such. But it definitely has a sense of atmosphere to it. Zelda Rubinstein's great as always, and I love David Warner. Yeah, let's see, another episode that I really wanted to talk about. For me personally, this has one of the best twists of any episode from Tales from the Crypt, and this one's top billing. I love this episode. It stars John Lovitz, the ever great John Lovitz, who was perfect in this role, by the way, and John Astin, who's most famous for playing Gomez in the '60s Addams Family show. He also played the Riddler in the '60s Batman in just a couple of episodes, I think. Yeah, top billing. It's about a very down on his luck actor who can't seem to get a role. He just hasn't got the right look. You know, he's not the most attractive for people. And yeah, he goes for a role in Shakespeare's Macbeth. And yeah, let's just say that he'll do anything to get a role. Okay, even if it involves murder, he'll do anything to get this role. He just needs a role. Okay, and I don't really want to say anything else other than that. John Astin's character, who's the director of this play, is very much. He's very out there, very flamboyant. John Astin's great as always, but yeah, it's got a great twist. This episode has a great twist to it. And yeah, it manages to be quite comedic, but I really feel for John Lovitz in this episode. I really feel for him. You can't really condone what he does in this episode, but at the same time, it's just kind of, he just hasn't got the look, and he'll do anything for a film role. Another episode that I really like that has kind of a few twists and turns, actually, is called Abracadabra, and it's notable for starring Beau Bridges. About a couple of brothers that are doctors, and one of which pulls a prank on his brother, and he never really kind of truly recovers from it. And let's just say that he's looking out for some revenge. Again, I don't really want to go into this too much, but Abracadabra is a great episode. It's got kind of like quite a scary, dark concept to it, actually, at its core. I actually think it's one of the darker. It is one of the darker episodes, in fact, when you actually look at it from a plot standpoint. So yeah, Abracadabra. What's Cooking? Another great one. Christopher Reeve, Superman himself in this. Again, another one of my personal favourites. Meatloaf in this as well. Don't want to go into details. Just a guy. They're struggling with business. So they kind of like need a new recipe, a new cellar, if you will, to get people eating in their place. So yeah, I'm not really going to say more than that. But yeah, another one, Television Terror. Really good episode. It's Morton Downey Jr. in this, who plays a complete and utter arsehole. And it's Morton Downey Jr. It's essentially him playing himself, in all honesty. All for the ratings. I think this makes a lot of commentary about ratings, what, TV, for example, what they'll do just to get ratings nowadays, churning anything and everything out. In this, they spend the night in a haunted house, hoping the ratings will go through the roof, yeah, as I said, he plays a complete arsehole in this episode. They're trying to spend the night there, and things start happening. Shit goes down, so to speak. Really good episode. Good fun. Kind of a creepy setting to it as well. So yeah, that's definitely another episode that's a favourite of mine. Another one I really like was a couple here that follow a similar theme to a degree. There's one called Strung Along, which actually stars Zach Galligan, most famous for Gremlins in '84, and obviously, Gremlins 2 in 1990. Strung Along has a very kind of a thriller horror aesthetic to it. Again, one of the more serious episodes, certainly. There's not really much humour in this. This is a very kind of straight-laced episode with a great memorable ending, in my opinion. It has a really kind of creepy ending to it. I feel like this has got quite a Hitchcockian tone. Now, all of these episodes I've talked about, I have actually read in comic form. And for the most part, they are generally quite similar. Some of these episodes have, certain aspects have been changed, or elaborated on, in the episode as opposed to the actual comic story. But for the most part, a lot of these episodes that I've already mentioned are generally quite faithful recreations of the comics. The ventriloquist dummy from season, great episode. Notable for starring Don Rickles. Again, this is actually an episode that actually manages to be quite creepy, but in the final act, it manages to throw a lot of humour in there as well. This is one of the more kind of batshit crazy episodes, certainly towards the end. A really good episode, though. I'd imagine you'd probably find it quite creepy, certainly if you're afraid of dummies. And this kind of goes for Strung Along as well, because it actually revolves around a puppet and a puppeteer trying to make his big comeback. Now, another episode I want to quickly mention, because I'd almost forgot about this, and it's actually one of my personal favourites, is Cutting Cards with Lance Henriksen. I think this episode's great, and this is actually, I would say, practically almost a panel-for-panel recreation of the comic story. It's about two gamblers that hate each other's guts. They're willing to bet anything to get one over on each other, and the stakes increasingly just get higher and higher during the course of this episode. These two guys really do hate each other's guts, and the ending is just great. It's kind of dark, but it's funny. You can't help but laugh. It's a really good episode. So yeah, I mean, they're just some of my favourites. There's a lot more. There's a lot more episodes there. There's an episode called Only Skin Deep, which is a good episode. It's very horror-esque, certainly in its ending with that. Split Personality is another episode that I'd certainly say is worth a watch. That actually has Joe Pesci in it, and again, a memorable ending. This episode proves to be quite comedic, but it's the balance between horror and comedy that Tales from the Crypt does so damn well. It's one of them shows that I think it's left a legacy. I think it really has. I think Tales from the Crypt is one of the best horror anthology shows out there. Not to be confused with, Tales from the Dark Side, which I feel like some people sometimes get it confused with. I mean, the EC horror comics, as I said, I used to read them a lot as a kid. I've collected them as an adult in hardcover form. I love reading these stories. Their twist endings, and very much they're a product for their time. I mean, admittedly, some of these stories might seem a little dated now, some of which, but the majority of these stories still hold up really damn well now. Very influential. A lot of film directors, a lot of people that work within the horror industry actually grew up reading these stories. The likes of Stephen King himself, John Carpenter, even Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger himself. These comics they influenced a lot of people within the horror genre. And as I said, they're very much considered to be classics of the genre now. I feel like with Creepshow, which was obviously a movie directed by George A. Romero, written by Stephen King, that was released in 1982. That film is very much a love letter. It's a homage to the classic EC horror comics of the 50s. It very much has that essence. And Stephen King and George A. Romero, it was a collaboration, both of which used to read these comic books when they were younger. It's one of my favourite anthology series of all time. Annoyingly, which I don't actually understand this, it's never actually been officially released. This show has never been officially released on DVD in the UK, which I find really weird. This is a popular show with quite a fan base. They've all been released in America and Australia, I believe, and I'm sure many other places in the world, but for whatever reason, they've never had a UK official release, which I really do find bizarre. That's pretty much all I really wanted to say on the show and what it really means to me. John Cassier's Crypt Keeper, the opening theme, The morality tales with their big twist endings, the fact that it can really do a good job of balancing horror and humour, which isn't exactly the easiest thing to do. I just want to quickly say one more, actually. I want to throw one more episode in here. The Secret from season 2, which was actually Larry Drake's second episode in Tales from the Crypt. He was the escaped axe murderer in And All Through the House. And The Secret, it's not widely regarded as being one of the best episodes of Tales from the Crypt, but I really like it. I really enjoy it. It has a big twist ending. It's a twist ending, actually, that actually cropped up quite a few times over the course of the comic run. Because Tales from the Crypt, I believe it ran for 27 issues, 4 stories per issue. And I think the Vault of Horror, Haunt of Fear ran for a similar amount. I think there was like a 1 or 2 issue difference. I do believe that there were actually plans on introducing another EC horror comic to add to them 3. But unfortunately, that's when the comic code come in and, it ended. The comics were gone. They were banned, and but the legacy, I think, certainly lives on, certainly among horror fans anyway. But that's it for today. Anyway, thanks to everyone that listened, and I'll be back again soon, boils and ghouls, to haunt you, torment you, and do whatever else. Take care.